Ever just get totally sucked into like a really specific subreddit? Find your people on Discord, like fans of some super obscure band you thought only you remembered.
Yeah.
That feeling, where it's like you found that one corner of the internet where everyone just gets it. That's kind of what we're going to be diving into today. We've got Clara, who's doing some really interesting thinking about all this for her dissertation, actually. She's a sociologist, so she's digging deep into the whole idea of online communities. And to help us unpack all of this, we're also taking a look at this book, Imagined Communities by Benedict Anderson. Now, before you switch off thinking, hard pass, trust me, this stuff ties into your daily life like crazy, maybe even more than you'd think.
What's so fascinating about Clara's take on this is that she's taking this classic idea from Anderson, this really big idea, and kind of holding it up to, well, the digital age. See, the book itself, it's really focused on how something as big and as seemingly real as a nation, like the country we live in, it's actually what Anderson calls an imagined community.
Okay, I got to be honest, that sounds a little out there. I mean, how can a whole nation be imagined?
Right, it's a big concept. But think about it this way. Most of us, we're never going to meet every single person who shares our nationality, right? Yet, there's still this feeling of connection, this sense of belonging that we feel. And Anderson, he argues that this sense, it comes from shared experiences, especially, back in the day. Things like reading the same newspaper.
Okay, so everyone's getting their news from the same place, forming their opinions on current events, all that. And it creates this sense of a shared identity, even if they're miles apart, never met.
Exactly. It's like this collective, we're all in this together feeling. Even if it's with millions of people, you'll never actually meet face to face.
Right. That makes sense.
And what's so cool about what Clara's doing is she's asking, well, how does this idea, this imagined community, how does it change when we bring it to the online world?
It's not just passively reading the same newspaper anymore, is it?
Exactly. We're talking about actively engaging, debating in the comments, making memes about the news, building these whole relationships over shared interests online. So is that something fundamentally different from what Anderson was talking about? Or is it more like just a new spin on that same concept?
It's like Anderson was looking at newspapers and Claire's looking at how that's evolved, right? I mean, think about it like this. You've got massive online multiplayer games, right? Where players feel this sense of national pride, but for their in-game faction. It's still this imagined community, but the way it plays out feels so much more immediate and, intense,
That is such a good point. Because the digital space, it brings in all these layers of interaction, visibility that just weren't possible before. Like, think about reading a newspaper article in the past. You could sort of picture others having that same experience. But now, online, you can actually see those other people. You see their reactions, their profiles, their whole online thing. So it's not just imagining the community anymore. You're kind of seeing it in action right in front of you. And it's that shift, to a more visible, more interactive experience that really gets to the heart of what Clara is asking in her research. Is there a fundamental difference between these digital communities and the imagined communities that Anderson wrote about? Or is it more like our online communities just more real because we're experiencing them so directly? You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. It's like, back in the day, maybe you'd bump into someone at the store, you're both reading the same newspaper, and there's that unspoken, we're part of the same community thing happening.
Yeah.
But online, it's like that connection gets amplified, doesn't it? Yeah. You're seeing people's thoughts, their jokes, even their arguments, all in real time, playing out right there in front of you.
Yes, exactly. And this actually brings us to another super interesting idea, this concept of third places.
Third places.
Yeah, it's a sociology thing. It's basically a term for any space outside of home and work where people get together and connect. So think your local coffee shop, the park everyone takes their dog to, even that bookstore with the comfy chairs,
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
There's spots where you can just maybe chat with people you recognize, maybe not. It's casual, it's comfortable, and it seems like those spaces are crucial for building a sense of community, right?
But how does that whole idea work in the digital world, though? That's where it gets a little tricky, I think. Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Clara, she specifically mentioned Discord servers, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, so many people use Discord now.
And I think these servers, the ones dedicated to specific interests, could be our modern-day third places, Whether it's about gaming or books, movies, whatever, even just discussing this podcast.
It really makes you wonder if these digital third places, if they're changing how we connect, how we build relationships. Yeah. It's like instead of that chance encounter at the coffee shop, now we're sliding into DMs or catching up on voice chat. So is it the same type of connection, really? Or is there something fundamentally different going on there?
And that's where it gets really, really interesting because, I mean, there's no doubt that online spaces, they can foster these amazing senses of belonging. People even end up becoming friends in real life after meeting online, right? But then there's always that other side of the coin. We have to at least consider the potential downsides, too.
There's always a catch, right? So what are we, like, maybe overlooking in this whole rush towards digital communities?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is this idea of weak ties. Have you heard of that term before?
I don't think so.
So weak ties, they're those casual connections we make in those more traditional third places. You know, like think about the barista who knows your order by heart, or those people you always see and say hi to at the dog park. It's not like they're your best friends or anything.
Right. Just those familiar faces, part of your routine.
Exactly. But
Well,
even though they're weak ties, they can actually be really valuable, like for finding new jobs, getting recommendations, even just that feeling like you're part of a bigger social fabric, you know?
okay, so I'm sensing a but coming here. Are you saying that online communities might not be as good at creating those weak ties?
It's a valid question, isn't it? Because think about how much time we all spend now in these really curated online spaces, right? Where we're mainly interacting with people who already share our interests. So it makes you wonder, are we maybe missing out on those more random encounters, those serendipitous connections that tend to happen in the offline world, those more public spaces?
It's like we're trading those chance encounters for a more, like, tailored experience. It sounds good on paper, but
But it might be limiting us in ways we haven't fully grasped yet.
right. It's all about finding that balance then, I guess, between
Yeah.
those super specific connections we build online and the more, I don't know, casual, diverse connections we make in those offline spaces. But you know what else I think is a big part of this whole online community thing? The whole idea of online identity. Like
Yeah.
how we present ourselves online isn't always a straightforward reflection of who we are offline, is it?
You're hitting on such a crucial point because that ability to curate our online personas, it's powerful. But it can also be misleading, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, we can choose exactly what we want people to see about ourselves, hide the parts we don't like, and even, let's be honest, adopt whole different personas if we want to.
It's like how many people have that picture-perfect Instagram feed? You know, the highlight reel of their life, but not necessarily the whole story. And hey, there's nothing wrong with wanting to put your best foot forward, but it does make you think, right? Like, how is all this online self-styling impacting our sense of, well, authenticity? And not just that, but how does it affect our ability to really connect on a deeper level, both online and offline?
Such a good point. And you know, this all ties into something called confirmation bias, which basically is just our natural human tendency to look for information that already lines up with what we believe and avoid anything that challenges our views.
Yeah, we all do that to some extent, right?
Sure. It's human nature. But here's the thing. In the past, our access to information, it was limited, right? You had your local newspaper, maybe a few magazines, that was it. But now, with the internet, algorithms are literally tailoring our online experiences for us all the time. So it's so easy to get stuck in these echo chambers where our existing biases are just constantly being reinforced.
So even though we might feel like we're super connected to our online communities, are we actually, like, narrowing our perspectives without even realizing it? So where does all this leave Clara in her dissertation then? Like, what conclusions do you think she might be heading towards with all this imagined versus real stuff about online communities?
Well, I don't want to try to guess her final conclusions or anything, but I do think she's found some seriously important questions to ask, you know, about the future of communities in general.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do here too, right?
Totally. We're all trying to figure out how these online spaces, they're powerful. They can really bring people together. But there's that potential for, I don't know, division too, you know? It's a lot to unpack.
And that's what makes what Claire is doing so fascinating to me, because it's not just about whether online communities are real or not, right? It's about how these digital spaces are actually changing what community even means, you know?
Absolutely. It's about understanding what's different, what's possible now, and also what we need to watch out for, all in the context of this digital world, right? Like, think about those online communities where people are sharing information organizing to tackle real-world problems. That's huge.
Like activism or social justice movements. I mean, those are often powered by these online communities where people can connect, share resources, organize, all that.
Exactly. It's amazing how these digital spaces can mobilize people on a global scale. But then, on the flip side, there's also the potential for things like misinformation to spread, even manipulation. It's a lot to consider.
It really is like this double-edged sword of the digital age, isn't it? Huge potential for good, but also, well, the potential for harm.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of social capital comes in, which I think is important here. Because it's not just about our individual connections, right? It's also about the networks we're a part of, the resources we can access through those connections, all of that.
So online communities, they can boost our social capital in a way, but they can also, limit it if we're not careful, right?
Yeah.
Especially if we end up in those echo chambers we talked about where we're only hearing from people who already agree with us.
100%. So it's about being mindful of those risks and trying to build communities that encourage healthy debate, critical thinking, and, just being open to different points of view.
It's not just about finding people who like the same things as us. It's also about engaging with people who challenge us to think differently, right? Help us see the bigger picture.
That's a great way to put it.
And that's something we can all try to do more, I think, both online and offline, right? Like real connection, real understanding, it comes from being open to the full human experience, the good and the bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's what makes this whole conversation about online communities so fascinating, because it's really a reflection of where we're at right now,
Yeah.
As a society, I mean. We're all trying to figure out connection, community, even our sense of self in this digital age.
It's a trip, that's for sure. But it's an important conversation to be having. And honestly, we're so glad that Clara and her research are a part of it.
Yeah.
It's really got us thinking.
Me too. And I have a feeling her dissertation is going to be a really valuable contribution to this whole conversation, this back and forth about the future of communities, online and offline, the whole deal.
It really is an interesting time to be thinking about all of this. I mean, we're living in a world where the internet, all these online spaces, they're shaping our lives in such a major way. So we have to be aware of that influence, the good and the bad.
And I think by being willing to really think critically about our online experiences, we can move forward with more intention, make more conscious choices about how we're interacting online.
It's about building communities that are based on understanding, empathy, and, that shared goal of making the world a better place, which, hey, that's something we can all get behind.
100%.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into online communities. We hope it sparks some new ideas for you.
Yeah, keep those conversations going. What does community mean to you in the digital age and beyond? Lots to think about.
Until next time.